Hello everyone. This next vid, I'm going to give a disclaimer. Nothing intended for legal purposes. Talking about history, things of the past. Even though sometimes I may talk like I'm speaking in the present, I'm not. I don't have dogs anymore. Haven't had them for years, but I do have some experience with them, and sometimes I share it in these videos and in chats and in my group and all that. I really enjoy it, and the responses are great, and the support is great also. But I want to touch on something, uh, a few things. I'm not even sure what I'm going to call this video, but just touch on a few things. Uh, things have a way in life and in the dogs of coming around full circle, and sometimes things are generational. And every so often, there's this train of thought about hard biting dogs. You know, even in the past, throughout the history, people appreciate them and they bred for them. And there's great examples of that. Tudor's Goldie and Tudor's Blackjack Jr. and even Spike and a lot of the Williams dogs from back in the day, being known as rough dogs. Kobe's Pinscher and Kobe's Kager and a lot of them. Uh, More so in the past. In the distant past, dogs were bred according to their performance. The pedigree mattered more so the breeder mattered, who bred them and why and which dogs they were using. And that had a way of changing because, more people were paying more attention to pedigrees. And this is a good thing, paying attention to how they're put together, who the dogs came from, which bloodlines go together best, or families of dogs, which breeders uh, had a high percentage or a better percentage than others of producing match dogs and competition dogs. But the hard biting stuff, that I've always been intrigued by this aspect of it. On the one hand, you have people that want hard biting dogs, rough dogs, finishers, all that stuff. And then on the other hand, you have those same people and everybody else, not wanting to breed the curs, not wanting to have curs, but with hard biting dogs, they'll make exceptions for them. Hardest biting dog I ever seen, and although he quit, I'm gonna breed him because genetics don't matter, and that doesn't matter. And if a dog can produce, he can produce, and you hear all that. I don't agree with it. It's never proven that to be the norm, to be the rule. That's the exception, and I've talked about that before. But the point is, when you go to extremes like that, uh, things have a way of, because you've gone to that extreme, you lose other traits like gameness or speed or intelligence. And the same can be said for gameness. If you key on it too much and all you have is a bunch of game plugs with no ability and no talent and no smarts, you may have a bunch of dogs that don't quit, but you couldn't win with them. So you have to have that balance. And it just surprised me sometimes how people would accept certain things like a hard biting dog, take it home and breed it after it quit. But those same people were criticizing dogs that quit as if, because they kept this dog that quit, even though he was a hard biter, they're going to take a chance in breeding him because of his hard mouth and maybe even strength and other attributes it has, right? And try and make a family out of it. And although people say, yeah, that's been done, uh, they may be able to say that within their own family of dogs, but on the whole, they can't say it because nobody keeps stats. It's just what you hear from other people. But nobody checks. Nobody asks for stats. Nobody asks for proof. They just accept what the breeder says and take it as that, and then they go and repeat it. For example, one famous dog, he quit, and somebody, and this is not just one, but this happens a lot. And somebody will take that and go, yeah, but they built a whole family of dogs around him. He's producing this and that. But then when I do my research, I don't see it. And back in the day, I didn't see it. Not saying that they didn't produce winners and they didn't produce hard-biting dogs, but percentages were real low, and there was not a bunch of them. That's why I'm always talking about, not including curs or cold dogs into your breeding program, because that's what you're going to have a tendency to get. The negatives seem to always come out first, or most, right? And the same thing with game dogs, just game dogs. You get a higher percentage, but they have no ability because all the other traits have not been concentrated on too. They have not been carried forward. So you got to have a balance. You want a little bit of everything. And when you do that, every once in a while you get an exceptional dog. And overall you have above average dogs. And you have some very good dogs, and you have some real good dogs, and you have some that don't make the grade. That's always standard too. So, I mean, the point to this is, how do you improve on that? How do you improve on, how do you make your way through the waters of what do I keep? What do I breed? What is it that past breeders did that I can improve on? Now, there's been several top breeders. They're well known. I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to use them as an example. If someone is in the past is known to produce good dogs consistently, then what should be looked at, in my opinion, is what were their flaws? What was done? What did they do that was the norm of the time, or the norm for them in their family of dogs, to that would be something negative in anyone's point of view, even their own. They got by with it. They made do with it. They worked around it. And someone getting dogs from them because they like them, if you do your research on the breeder and you balance the good with the bad supersedes the good, but there's still things that they did that maybe you wouldn't do. And by not doing what they did, those negative things, I see that as one way to improve on the dogs you got from that particular breeder. Because if you're not advancing, you're not making things better, you're not trying to get better dogs or making better dogs, then you have a tendency to go stagnant. And if you take their exceptions and try to make them the rule, or keep them with your own family of dogs, they're just going to degrade them more rather than improve them. And everybody had to make exceptions, even me. I've given a couple examples of friends of mine that I got dogs from, and they quit. They asked me not to cull them, so I didn't, just as to show my friendship to them. Or normally, most of my friends, if I got a dog from them, would quit. They expected me to cull it and not use it in my breeding program and all that, and not keep it. And that was just something that was understood. But in these two cases, they asked me not to. I did it because they were my friends. And behind my dogs, there's dogs that quit and dogs that are cold and all that stuff. But I felt that, just because that stuff was back there didn't mean that I had to repeat it. So sometimes you got to think outside of the box. You got to have an open mind, try different things, and do different things, and see if it makes a difference. You may have a hypothetical in your mind of how to do something, or something you want to do, something you want to try, and then you build a theory on that, and then you implement it. See if it works. You can't just go by what somebody said, and you can't just go by what you read. You have to test it. You have to test everything, whether it's a conditioning thing, or whether it's food, or a breeding technique, or individuals used in breeding. In this, I'm talking about breeding. I'll get into conditioning a little bit later. But, try it, test it. Even though, uh, you might get negative results from it, at least what you learn from it will teach you not to do that again, or not continue down that path. And I think what's more important in today's age is, in the past, people could have a lot more dogs. We've all heard it: 50 dogs in a yard, 100 dogs, 200 dogs in a yard, 250, like that. We don't have that today, or it's not wise to do that today. And it's not allowed in a lot of areas that people live to do that. But what that does is it becomes more microscopic. It Because you have a smaller yard, you can concentrate on only keeping the best dogs in your yard. And you can experiment with the very best that you consider the very best. And it makes you make particular breedings because you feel they have a high probability of success, rather than just testing here and there. I'm going to breed this dog to several bitches and see what I get. No, I'm going to breed this to a particular bitch because this is what I expect, and I may breed into this one and that one down the line. You don't have to make several breedings at a time. You could just make one breeding here, one breeding there, once a year, once every 2 years. And you'll still have particular numbers of dogs in your yard that you can test, that you can check your breeding results. And when you're breeding dogs, you're concentrating on just a few anyways. You're trying to find out which ones are the best producers. So you don't need a bunch of them. I proved that. Boyles proved that. Frank Shy proved that. A lot of breeders proved that. Frank Rocca proved that. Several guys. RF proved that with a small number of dogs, if they're quality and they have the propensity to produce, you don't need a bunch of them. So that's how I see someone improving their family of dogs. It's done individually, doesn't mean it has to be done on a whole, and it doesn't even have to reflect the whole breed, but on an individual basis, you can improve your dogs. And I felt that's what my friend did when he got my best dogs from me. He made them better. And that's what he was supposed to do. If I had continued, I would have the same train of thought. I got to make them better. What can I do? So what I did is I cut out the exceptions. I had a set of rules, standards, and I stuck to them. And I ran with it. And they proved to work. If they had proven not to work doing things the way I did, I'd be sitting here talking different, and giving other examples. But one of the things I did is I took examples from other people that were older than me that were breeders and see what they did. And then I tried it and it worked. Because my thought is, not to knock anybody, but them people ain't so special. They're not any smarter than me. And if they could do it, I could do it. But that has to reflect on my peers and anybody that I'm quote unquote mentoring. I'm not that special. I'm nothing great. If I can do it, they can do it too. And they can look back on whatever they consider mistakes that I made and improve on those by making less mistakes, by not doing some of the things I did. And if you have a rule, whatever it is, or rules, whatever they are, if they prove to work, then you continue with them. And within that, you have to improve on those. So one example would be, let's say somebody has a litter and there's a great dog in the litter, and it's only one, and the litter mates are average and or below average, and some don't make the grade. That's typical. And you take that great dog and you breed him, and he happens to produce. If he doesn't, then you just discard him right away, you know. And for me, it was in the first breedings I made with them. They had to show me they could produce in the first breeding I made, regardless of whether it was tight line bred or loose line bred or outcross or whatever it was. That was one of my rules. I wouldn't continue on with a dog or a female if they didn't do that. And you have to make the breedings to find out if they do that or not. It's not like, well, I don't think that'll work, I'm not going to try it. You have to try it, see how it works. But let's say that one male did produce for you. Now, from that point forward, I don't have to breed to a litter he produced where only one dog was good in the litter or superior in the litter. I could take him, starting that he was a great dog as an example, and say from that point on, I'm only going to breed the dogs off of him that came from a high percentage litter. Let's say half the dogs in the litter panned out, meaning half the dogs were tested and worked out, half the dogs were competed with and worked out, and half the dogs, after I bred them, were able to produce. And if you do that, you'll see your numbers increase. You'll see them get better and better. And along the way, you have to make decisions on which ones that you think will produce and which ones you don't, and then you have to put that into play as well, which means you might be making an exception here and there where I'm going to try this dog, and he didn't follow the 50% pattern or whatever, and then use the ones that did. So you compare the 50% success rate in a litter compared to one that's maybe 25%, and see which ones throw better. And wherever along the line that goes, you can still use that 50% average, or half the litter works out. But generally, it's, and I've done that too. I tried using ones that had a lower percentage. They threw okay, but not as good as the ones that had a higher percentage in the litter. And it just seems because there's more abundance of good stuff in that 50% litter that they had a propensity to throw more consistently and a higher number of good dogs. Whether that's nature or percentages or however you want to look at it, that's the way it worked out. But you have to try the other stuff too to see. That takes time, and everything takes time. But with having a smaller number of dogs, you have a tendency to only keep the best ones, because you don't have room, you don't have the time, you don't have the funds, or whatever the reason is, to keep ones that are not quote unquote worthy. So you have to look at what someone else did, the person you got the dogs from, or if you've been breeding your own dogs for a while, and see how can I improve on them, and then put that into play and see if you were right or not. Once you've been breeding dogs for several generations, you're going to be right most of the time in the decisions you make, from choosing pups to recognizing certain temperament behaviors. You're going to prefer a certain structure. You're going to prefer a certain type of athleticism and ability. And you're going to have things within your own family of dogs that you prefer more than other things. And those are the ones that you're going to key on in your breeding program. Now, the same thing with conditioning. And this is something me and my friend Shorty were talking about. Thanks for uh, the convo, Shorty. Is, how do you improve on conditioning? Because I've said this about conditioning as well as breeding. There's certain things that do not change. And what I mean by that is the concepts of conditioning, how to condition an athlete, and the concepts, patterns, methods of breeding, how to do it, which ones to use. Those don't change. With breeding, it's the quality of individual you're using and the traits you're looking for and how to continue with those traits. So if you started off with Jeep dogs, they have certain traits. You can keep them going no matter what crosses you put in there, no matter how you breed them, no matter what method, half brother, half sister, 75-35, 50, 75-25, 50-50 cross, heavy inbreeding cousins, father, son, daughter, mother, son, uncle to niece, aunt to nephew, and like that. Brother, sister, however it is. And with conditioning in later years, one of the things I noticed, which is a boon to the modern dog people, is in the past people didn't spend a lot of times with their dogs. Now I realize that because of my whatever background I had in martial arts and boxing, is that you got to kind of work out all the time. You got to stay fit all the time. You got to be doing stuff all the time. And with dogs, we can teach them a lot of stuff. We can influence a lot of different ways, And I noticed people weren't doing that, so I started doing that. And it was the same thing with the feed. People gave regular food, and there's nothing wrong with regular food. But I thought if I fed them a better quality of food over generations, that would improve their health and vitality and bone structure, density, muscle, all that. And it proved to work. With conditioning, you have certain methods of doing it, but a lot of times what people did is the dogs just sat there, and then when they put them in keep, that was the first time they ever learned how to work something, and it was the first time they were ever exercised for any length of time. Now, a lot of dogs are active, and most dogs will become active, but again, you improve on that. So you have dogs that are active. That just means that you can make them more active. So most dogs, they'll do their own exercise in their pen or in their chain spot throughout the day. Well, when you take that and then you put extra on top of that, taking them out and hand walking them, taking them out and running them, teach them how to use a treadmill, work them with the flirt pole, teach them how to use a spring pole, take them out swimming, take them out in fields and let them run around. Even with a long lead, you can have a 50-foot lead, a 100-foot lead, and just let them run around. You don't even have to do a lot yourself. Those were the things that people didn't do in the past. And they didn't condition their dogs, and they didn't think about how to peak a dog and how to work them. How much rest do they need? Get them used to being rubbed down. Get them used to all these influences, outside influences that could affect them. Walking them on different surfaces and shooting guns around them and letting kids play with them. And my kids used to go out in the yard and just play around the dogs, and sometimes they play with the dogs. And what that has a tendency to do is the kids are running around, well, all the dogs start running around too, jumping around. As the kids are out there for a half hour, an hour, or 2 hours, the dogs are active that whole time that the kids are out there. They're basically conditioning themselves. So I used to think about all this stuff, think about outside the box. How can I improve my dogs? How can I improve my conditioning? And, also the food. So there's a lot more science and a lot more studies done about food itself. What's the best food for dogs, or what's the good food for dogs? What can you give them? What shouldn't you give them? And we all know there's a lot of additives to food, and there's a lot of, they put antibiotics in food and steroids and add salt water and this and that. Sometimes the food isn't as good today as it was in the past. So how do you offset that? Well, people have learned to, give them antioxidants. And, Bakary mentions this. He used activated charcoal in case the dog is poisoned or gets some kind of poison in them. That activated charcoal will offset it. It's kind of like they use it like when someone gets snake bit. you know, Before you get to the anti-venom, they'll just, if you have it handy and you just keep it, there's people that have used it and it's offset the venom before they can get to the doctor and get the anti-venom in them. And it helps them. And there's other natural remedies you can give to dogs. A lot of people are using cinnamon and turmeric, and antioxidants are in berries and certain berries. And again, they don't recommend you give dogs raisins or grapes. You have to look it all up. I even know people that live outside the country, and because they don't use refrigeration, they feed raw meat, but they don't use refrigeration just to offset any bacteria that might be in there. They give their dogs antibiotics once in a while, right? And they make sure they only drink, bottled water. Or I know one guy lived rural outside this country. He just boils the water for the dogs. Now that's a lot of boiling and a lot of water, you know, and maybe they only do that in keep, because depending on where you live, people and animals over a period of time, and sometimes over a period of generations, they become accustomed to the bacteria that's in the water. So it doesn't bother them. It would bother a stranger coming in or somebody visiting, a tourist or something. But the people that live there don't. But just as far as keeps are concerned, they use bottled water or they boil their own water, and just give the dog strictly that water during keep. So you have certain stuffs that you can give them that can offset the additives and the crap, whatever it is they put in the kibble or they put in the raw food. A lot of people have learned that raw kale, raw spinach, and like that, that there's some things that are not healthy for you in it, right? Because the body doesn't break it down, or maybe because there's herbicide on it or whatever it is. Now they found E. coli and salmonella in vegetables. So they learn all you got to do is cook your kale and cook your spinach. People have the tendency to believe that well, when you cook food, it takes all the nutrients out. If that were true, then we'd all be dead, because most of us eat cooked food. That's all we eat. So if you think that way, do the research. What happens to meat? What is lost in meat if I cook it? What nutrients are lost compared to if I eat it raw? And the same thing with vegetables and fruits and berries and whatever it is you're feeding them. Really do the research. And then after you've done the research, test it out. Give yourself 3 months. I'm giving them this raw diet. I had them on kibble, but I'm giving them this raw diet, and I'm going to see what happens. Because it's the same time you have people saying it's great, it's the best feed you can give. I'm not arguing that point. You have some, well, this made my dog sick. This happened to my dog. And it could be something as simple as, the meat was left out, and whether you bought it raw or you got your own raw meat and cut it up yourself or gave it to them yourself like that, bacteria formed on it. Now you have a problem. Made your dog sick. You have runny stool, yellow piss, whatever it is. So that's what I mean by testing it out, Give yourself time and give your dog time. And then also, one thing was, basically in the past, people just used to feed their dog whatever they fed them, and they fed them all the same, or they even fed them all the same amount. You go through a yard, and I give 2 cups dog food to my dogs, no matter how big they are. And I think people realize that, hey, they're different. Every dog's different, just like a person. Metabolism's different. Requirements sometimes are different. So you have to adjust the feed, and it doesn't mean that you're feeding every dog completely different. Even if it's a raw diet, it just means that you may give them more of one supplement, or protein, or fat, or vegetable. You give one more than you give the other, or you give one less than you give the other, even though they may be the same size dogs. Because of the metabolism, one might require more or less than another dog of the same size. Again, this is a lot of work, but that's the thing with having a small yard. It's still a lot of work, but it's not for a lot of dogs. So you can really concentrate on what works, what doesn't work. And just like the conditioning people have learned, even in my keep, it's an example, and it shows, one day a week off rest. But it also mentions that when the dogs are resting, they rest. You don't do nothing. They're put up, away, ain't running around, ain't jumping around. But even with that, if they need more rest, you give them more rest. And that's the thing with keeps, whether you buy them or you develop your own, you can adjust them. And my keep is set around how to work a dog, not so much day by day, do this, do that, do this, do that. You might have to adjust it. You might have to use some other method other than the one I put in my keep, but the concept is the same. Build them up incrementally. The weight should come down incrementally. And the feed, my feed, I feed all the way through. You can do different types. You can take whatever it is you're doing, and you can make it into a longer workout because you're trying to build endurance, right? But you could also take a workout and make it a hard workout for a short period of time and get the same results. Depends on what you're trying to do. And there's a certain way to build up strength, but there's different ways to go about it. And what I mean by certain way is you really want them working their back legs, the muscles around their kidneys, waist. Really want them digging in. So there's different ways to get them to do that. Some dogs, a lot of mine, they didn't need that bait method I show in my keep. They pull on the lead just while you're walking them. They're out front just pulling, digging in. And one simple thing that I changed up is that most people walk their dog with a collar, even if they're pulling. They've got a collar on their throat, And if you ask them, well, it helps build their muscles up, but yeah, but it also chokes them if they pull them really hard. It's simple. Just do it with a harness. They get a better pulling workout that way. They work their back legs. Their air passage is free. They can breathe. Because if you're concerned about working their neck muscle, there are different ways to do it. You can have them shake a rag all day long. You can have them pull, tug of war, or work a spring pull, get their neck muscles working, different ways. I like that. My favorite thing was to make them shake something. And that really got their neck working in different directions, back and forth. And they pull up and down, go this way, that way. The whole time their airway is not blocked. They have freedom of air to breathe in through their nose. So that's why I say just put a harness on them, teach them to walk with a harness, teach them to pull with the harness. It may be, and this is old method somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, might have been Don Carter in one of his old articles. Have a pocket full of pebbles and just throw a pebble out in front of them and make them pull. And eventually the dog, like the Pavlov effect, you keep doing it over and over, the dog, eventually you don't need to throw the pebble. You just the dog just pulls naturally. Because when you throw the pebble, you can encourage them to pull. And then they relate that voice to pulling. Eventually, you don't need to throw the pebble. You just use your voice and they'll pull. And you can adjust the workout that way too, the walk out that way. If you don't want them to pull that hard, don't say nothing to them. You want them to pick up the pace, talk to them. They'll pick it up. Sometimes I'd use 2 tennis balls. I'd throw one, make the dog pull, let him pull. I'd hold back, He'd get that ball in his mouth. He don't want to let it go, so I'd pull another ball, throw that one. Whether he dropped the ball he had and went after the other one, or he kept it till he got to the other ball and then grabbed the other one, I always had a free ball to continue that method of throwing it, changing balls like that. And you can do that over a couple of miles, with the harness on, and he'll pull. And you can adjust. He knows the ball is there, especially the yellow ones. They can see it, I don't know if they see that color, but anyways, they know the ball is there. So even if you hold back on them, it just makes them pull harder. They'll eventually get to it. So there's a lot of things you can do, but the point of it is, how do you improve? How do you improve on a great breeder? How do you improve on good conditioning? In the past, people wanted them thin and, sometimes dehydrated, And you can still have your dogs thin and be strong. This is something else we talked about, Some people condition their dogs and they condition them down to below weight, or they have them below weight, and then they work them up to weight. Now, I didn't do that, but because it's so hot where I live, up to 110 degrees, you can have a month or sometimes longer of over 100 degrees. I didn't want a lot of weight on my dogs. So during the summer, most of them, I had them at weight, which would be their conditioned weight, or even below it. And it didn't affect them because they become accustomed to that weight. And if you're giving them quality food, they're getting enough nutrients. And how do you know that? Well, you mess with them, take them out, walk them. Do they feel weak? And maybe you got to give them a little more food. Do they feel strong? You give them enough food. And what that has a tendency to do is the dog becomes accustomed to that weight, and he's getting enough nutrients to feed himself. But I didn't want him heavy because of the heat. I didn't want him catching heat stroke. I didn't want him getting a heart attack from running around. They were still active even in the summertime sometimes. Some were just nuts. So I definitely didn't want extra weight on those dogs, not even 2 pounds over. They were at weight or a little under, half a pound to a pound under. They got accustomed to it. Didn't bother them. Because every once in a while they're going to catch some animal and eat it, or I'm going to throw them a bone, beef bone. They're going to chew on it a while. So the weight might fluctuate a little bit, but I kept them on the thin side. And of course, back in the day, I saw how they looked in, schooling. Most of the time it didn't affect them, and they could breathe a lot better in that heat than they would if they had that extra weight on them that I normally would have in the wintertime because it's colder. So these are some of the things, to think about. Think about famous breeders. How can I become better than that? Because those great breeders of the past, there were great breeders before them, and I'm sure they felt, or they were at least thinking about it, is, I want to be better than him. I want to be better than that breeder. I want to have dogs better than the previous breeder. And especially if it's someone you got dogs from. How do you become better? And if you have a mentor, that mentor should be giving you advice. You take that advice and figure out how to do it better than him. That should be part of his teaching, to make the student better than the teacher. And that's advancement, that's progress, that's change. So whatever it is you can think to improve your dogs and make them better, implement it. Don't just do it and say, that works. Test it, because you're going to have some stuff you're going to say, yep, I tried it and that worked. And you're going to say, nope, I tried it, that didn't work. And it could be just your particular situation, could be The type of dogs you have could be only your dogs and someone else that worked for them. That's fine. None of that matters. What matters is the result, the end result. And just like in schooling dogs, when I used to do it, I wasn't too concerned of the beginning of the schooling. I was concerned at the end. The end is what matters. Are they still going to scratch? Do they still show finish? Do they want what they wanted at the beginning? All that stuff in between is just getting to the point. So if they finished strong, it ended well, they had the right attitude, I was good with that. And that's the same thing when you're breeding dogs and conditioning dogs and feeding dogs. What's the end result? Was it positive? Did it help you? Did it get you to another point, to a better point? Did it improve? So this is something that came up again. Thanks, Shorty. And something that I've been thinking about. That it's always that hard biting this and that, and like I said, it has a way of coming around. Because then they start concentrating on hard biting dogs. And then what happens is because they not paying attention to the other stuff, you have dogs that quit on top, and dogs that are lazy, and dogs that quit rank, and dogs that get frustrated, all this stuff, and then they end up stopping. And you can see this in a lot of times when you're just working a dog. I like dogs with a good work ethic. They didn't want to stop. That's another way of improving your dogs. If you just accept lazy dogs that don't like to work, this and that, they have their place, and you might like it, and you might breed them, and he don't throw lazy dogs, this and that. But again, when you have negatives like that and you breed them, they just have a tendency to come up. So I didn't like lazy dogs. I didn't like dogs that scratch slow. And I didn't like dogs that didn't have a good work ethic or have some intelligence of being able to be taught something, and more than a few things most of the time. So that's some of the stuff I see how to improve your dogs. And hope the video helps. Hope you like it. Thanks for your support. More on the way.